Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
They fell in love while filming Heartbreak. As Spencer and Alexandra's world was falling apart on screen, something magical was happening behind the scenes. 1923 might be a story drenched in war loss and the crumbling Dutton legacy. But for two of its breakout stars, it quietly became the beginning of something beautiful. Fans suspected it. The chemistry was too real, the emotions too raw. And now we finally know the truth. Love didn't just bloom in the script, it bloomed between the actors. But as the show barrels toward its explosive finale, one haunting question remains. Can their love survive the end of 1923? When 1923 returned for season 2, fans were expecting answers. Who lives? Who dies? Will the Dutton family survive the storm that's coming for them? But what no one expected, what no one could have prepared for, was that something even more powerful than the drama on screen was unfolding behind the camera. Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schlafer didn't just play Spencer and Alexandra, they became them. And somewhere along the way, while portraying one of the most emotionally intense love stories in Yellowstone history, they found something real. Off-screen, their connection deepened, and this time, it wasn't about acting. It started in the quiet moments between takes, shared glances, long conversations about grief, love, and the weight of carrying such tragic characters. According to insiders, the two became nearly inseparable during filming for season 2. What began as professional respect turned into something more personal and more intense. Crew members noticed how they supported each other through long, emotional days, how they stayed in character even when the cameras weren't rolling, and how the pain in their final scenes together wasn't just Spencer and Alexandra's, it was Brandon and Julia's too. People close to production revealed that during one of the most difficult sequences, when Spencer loses Alex once and for all, Brandon broke down after filming. But what's more telling? Julia didn't leave his side. Not once. The heartbreak was real, because the line between actor and character had completely blurred. Julia once said in an interview, "When Alex died, I felt like a part of me died. And maybe that part wasn't just Alexandra. Maybe it was the idea of saying goodbye to what she and Brandon had created, on and off screen." The producers, of course, remained quiet, but fans weren't fooled. From their public appearances to behind-the-scenes interviews, the chemistry between Brandon and Julia was unmistakable. Every time they looked at each other, there was something unspoken, something fragile, tender, and real. And let's not forget, these are two actors trained to hide behind characters. So when their eyes gave them away, it wasn't acting. It was something deeper. Julia, for her part, always spoke of Brandon with a kind of reverence. She once said, "He was my anchor. There were scenes I couldn't have survived without him." And Brandon wasn't shy either. He described Julia as the light that guided him through some of the darkest moments of Spencer's arc. "Julia gave me a safe place to fall apart," he said. That doesn't sound like co-stars. That sounds like something bigger. Something realer than even the world of 1923 could contain. As season 2 pushed both characters to the edge, Brandon and Julia leaned on each other harder than ever. And while the tragedy on screen reached unbearable levels, especially for fans still grieving Alex's death, off-screen a different story was unfolding. A story of hope, resilience, and a kind of love that's rarely born in the chaos of Hollywood. But here's where things get even more intense. Because while Brandon and Julia were falling in love behind the scenes, the show was unraveling. The Dutton Empire was cracking. Family members were dying, and the legacy that John Dutton Sr. fought so hard to protect was beginning to collapse. It's the end of an era, but could it also be the beginning of a new one? As the tension in 1923, season 2 reached its boiling point, something unusual began happening on set, an emotional energy that couldn't be explained by the script alone. Cast and crew alike felt it. The atmosphere during filming wasn't just heavy because of the Duttons unraveling, it was charged with something deeper, something more human. All eyes quietly turned toward Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schlafer, whose off-screen closeness had started to mirror the emotional devastation of Spencer and Alexandra's on-screen love story. But here's the twist. While their characters were spiraling into heartbreak, Brandon and Julia were building something far more intimate. It wasn't just chemistry anymore. It was vulnerability, it was trust, and it was the kind of emotional exposure that even seasoned actors rarely allow themselves to feel. People on set noticed the shift immediately. Julia didn't just show up as Alexandra, she arrived with a real lived-in heartbreak that only deepened with each take. Brandon too seemed changed. No longer just portraying grief, he was walking through it moment by moment. And that rawness didn't come from a script. It came from the emotional bond they had formed together. According to someone close to the production, the two would often isolate themselves before emotional scenes not to rehearse, but to talk to, sit in silence to connect on a level beyond character work. It was like they were bracing for impact. Together. There was one moment reportedly during the filming of the episode 7 climax where Brandon collapsed into Julia's arms after a brutal take. The camera had stopped rolling, but the tears didn't. And Julia didn't flinch. She held him not like Alexandra would hold Spencer, but like someone who truly knew the weight he was carrying. Not as an actor, but as a person. Their performances that day were called unforgettable by the crew, but it wasn't acting. It was reality bleeding through fiction. That's the paradox of 1923. While the story was built on suffering, the fall of the Duttons, the agony of war betrayal and death, Brandon and Julia found something pure within all the chaos. They found love while pretending to lose it. And that made every scene between Spencer and Alex even more haunting because you could feel it. The ache of people who knew what they were losing even if it was only in character. But what makes their story even more compelling is what it says about the emotional cost of storytelling. Brandon admitted in a later interview that playing Spencer had left scars. "There are days I still feel haunted," he said. The pain, the guilt, the love, none of it left when filming ended. And Julia confessed something even more revealing. "I was afraid to let go of Alex because letting her go meant letting go of what we shared." Were they talking about the show or each other? That's the question fans keep asking. Because if the rumors are true and their connection outlasted the cameras, then this wasn't just a behind-the-scenes romance. It was a love story born from tragedy, just like Spencer and Alexandra's, but with a second chance. And maybe that's why the final episodes of Season 2 feel so devastating. Because somewhere deep down, the actors weren't just saying goodbye to their characters, they were saying goodbye to a part of themselves. And maybe trying to hold on to something that was never meant to end. There's something eerie about how the lines between the script and real life started to blur. And word is, Taylor Sheridan saw it all unfolding. He's no stranger to emotionally charged storytelling, but in Season 2 of 1923, he didn't just write a love story, he captured one in real time. People close to the production say that somewhere during the middle of filming, Sheridan noticed the shift in Brandon and Julia's dynamic. It wasn't just acting anymore. The tension in their eyes, the softness in their voices, the kind of heartbreak that couldn't be faked. It all felt too real. And what did Sheridan do? He leaned into it. Scenes were rewritten, dialogue was tightened, and key emotional beats were sharpened. Not to push the drama, but to allow Brandon and Julia's real emotions to bleed into the narrative. It's subtle, but once you notice it, you can't unsee it. That quiet moment where Spencer stares into Alex's eyes just a second longer. That pause in her voice before she says, "I love you," for what feels like the last time. Those weren't just acting choices. They were real reactions. Taylor Sheridan, ever the master manipulator of human emotion, didn't just let it happen, he fed it. One source even claimed that Sheridan encouraged more improvisation during the emotional scenes between Spencer and Alex, giving the actors permission to go off script. And apparently those moments, raw, unrehearsed, and unscripted, made it into the final cut. When Julia broke down during one particular scene, it wasn't written that way. But Sheridan kept rolling. He whispered to the crew, "Let it breathe." What we saw on screen wasn't Alexandra mourning Spencer, it was Julia feeling the weight of something real, something she maybe hadn't even processed yet. Sheridan understood something most directors don't dare touch, that sometimes the best performances come from real emotion, even if it hurts the actors to go there. But here's the twist. He wasn't just crafting a love story, he was also building the fall. The Dutton legacy was always on shaky ground in 1923, but in Season 2 it felt like a house of cards trembling in slow motion. And as Spencer and Alex's world began to unravel, so did the world of the people who played them. Taylor Sheridan didn't just write tragedy, he orchestrated it. He turned the camera into a mirror and made Brandon and Julia confront their own emotions, then broadcasted those feelings to millions of viewers. It's why the heartbreak in season 2 feels so personal, because it is. And maybe that's why fans can't let go of the story, even now that the season has ended. Because whether Sheridan intended it or not, he gave us something we don't often get in scripted drama: truth. Love discovered in the middle of destruction. Pain that didn't stop when the director yelled cut. And two actors who weren't just pretending anymore, they were living it. What happens when the director sees your heart before you do? And what does it cost to pour your soul into a story that's already doomed? When production finally wrapped on 1923 season 2, everyone expected Brandon and Julia to walk away as actors who'd simply done their jobs. But that's not what happened, because something shifted during those final days on set. Something they couldn't leave behind. According to insiders, the emotional fallout was heavier than anyone anticipated. Julia was reportedly the last actor to leave the final shooting location. She lingered there alone, walking the quiet set one last time, like she was saying goodbye to Alexandra, and maybe trying to figure out what parts of that story still lived inside her. And Brandon? He vanished for a while. No press, no interviews, no statements. One close friend shared that he went off-grid for days, needing to breathe, needing to process. Because for him, Spencer wasn't just a role, it had become a mirror. A mirror that showed him what grief really looked like and what love could really feel like when it's slipping through your fingers. But here's the kicker. Even though 1923 had ended, Brandon and Julia didn't go their separate ways. Far from it. They started showing up together quietly at first. No red carpets, no staged photos, just the two of them grabbing coffee, disappearing into quiet corners of the city, sharing looks that didn't need words. It was never loud. It didn't need to be. Because something as raw as what they built on screen doesn't just fade overnight. Industry insiders say the bond they formed was too intense to ignore. Not just attraction, not just friendship, but a connection forged in fire. Emotional fire. It's the kind of thing that leaves a mark. The kind of thing that doesn't end just because the director calls it a wrap. Julia later admitted in a rare interview that letting go of Alexandra felt like losing a part of herself, and that the only person who truly understood that feeling was Brandon. "We went through something together that no one else really can understand," she said. "When you lose your character and the love that came with her, it stays with you. But so does the person who held your hand through it all." That's when fans started to connect the dots. This wasn't just about acting anymore. This was something real and maybe a little fragile, because their love wasn't built on normal circumstances. It was built in the middle of tragedy, in scenes drenched in loss, in tear-stained scripts and sleepless nights. And now that the story of Spencer and Alex is over, the question lingers: what becomes of the people who played them? Can you really separate the character from the person when the emotions were that real? Or is this the beginning of something new? Something even Sheridan couldn't have scripted? Now that 1923 has ended and the dust has settled over the Montana plains, a different kind of story is unfolding. One that's not written in a script, not directed on a set, and not shaped by Taylor Sheridan himself. This story belongs to Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schleipfer. And unlike Spencer and Alexandra, they're not bound by tragedy, at least not yet. What we're seeing now is the slow, unfiltered rise of something rare in Hollywood. Authentic connection born not out of convenience or publicity, but out of shared vulnerability and pain. Insiders say that while 1923 may have catapulted their careers, it's what happened off camera that changed their lives. After filming wrapped, both Brandon and Julia entered a strange in-between place. Not quite their characters, but not quite themselves anymore either. Julia reportedly took time away from everything. No new roles, no talk shows, no post-finale interviews, just space. Space to grieve the loss of Alexandra, yes, but also space to understand how deeply she had fallen into something that wasn't supposed to be real. It's been said that she kept a small keepsake from set, a piece of Alexandra's jewelry. Not because it was pretty, but because it reminded her of who she became in those moments when the cameras were rolling and Brandon was standing opposite her, eyes full of pain, arms open in heartbreak. Those weren't just scenes, they were shared truths relived over and over until fiction and reality blurred into one. Meanwhile, Brandon took a quieter route. He retreated entirely from public life for a few months, reportedly turning down multiple roles to focus on what? That's where it gets interesting. According to sources close to both of them, Brandon wasn't just stepping away to rest. He was figuring out what it meant to love someone you met while pretending to love someone else. The truth is, actors fall into intense connections all the time. But what makes this one different is that Brandon and Julia didn't just fall in love while pretending. They discovered love by surviving emotional warfare together. Think about it. They acted out grief, loss, abandonment, even death. They cried in each other's arms in scenes that drained them to the core. And when they went home at night, those emotions didn't just vanish. Julia once hinted at this in an offhand comment during a podcast appearance. She said, "Some nights I'd get back to my trailer and I'd still be crying. But it wasn't Alexandra anymore. It was me." She paused. And I think Brandon felt that too. So, what happens when the role ends, but the emotions don't? That's the part that's unfolding now. Brandon and Julia have been spotted attending indie film festivals together, quietly supporting each other's side projects. They haven't made a red carpet debut as a couple yet, but it's not hard to see where things are headed. And if you're wondering whether this is all just speculation, think again. Just a few weeks ago, Brandon posted a photo on Instagram. Nothing flashy, just a blurry golden hour shot of someone laughing in a field, hair blowing in the wind. No tag, no caption, but fans instantly recognized Julia's silhouette. The comments exploded. It's her one follower wrote, "Tell me they're in love for real," said another. Brandon didn't delete the post. He didn't even respond. But he didn't have to.